Hello, everyone. My name is Dylan James. This is my week 4 assignment for HES 400. And first, I wanted to talk about what this whole goal was, as we're talking about the different organizational choices when talking from a managerial perspective. So, what is a managerial organization? Simply, it's a philosophy in which one in the position of a manager will follow to try to ensure a specific outcome of the workers a manager would be managing. So it is a philosophy or line of duty in which you would follow to try to get an outcome from the people you are managing or in charge of. The major key to success in this management position is to focus on a system you want to use and follow its logic to ensure a successful operation that can be maintained throughout long periods of time. So the one I decided to talk about that I found the most interesting was a hierarchical organization. Um, Simply, a hierarchical organization is a system in which all members of the organization are subordinates to a single monarch of the organization. It derives its name from a hierarchy, which is a term many of you may have heard before. And it is by far the most dominant mode of organizations of large corporations as well as government offices and organized religious faiths. And you've seen it all throughout history of kingdoms and whatnot being ruled under one ruling class, everyone else being ruling under one ruling class. So the flow of a hierarchical organization, pros and cons do exist to this. A pro is that information between the ranks is very limited and thus is very difficult for people to gain access to it without being told by a direct superior. This is also one of its greatest cons, unfortunately. The lack of information of why any person who isn't a direct superior is doing makes all of their understanding of the organization impossible and thus very difficult to optimize from an external point of view. What I mean by this is that it's very hard if you are a low underling to really have any control over your own environment or to make changes that could make it more efficient because you do not have enough information to know exactly why you're doing what you are being told to do. Social aspects also come into play as well because it is a powerful ranking member can overrule really anyone underneath them, which allows for complete blocks in the communication as well as breaks in the flow process of information and work being done. For anyone who's ever worked in a company at retail environment, you can be told by your supervisor to do something and then be told by your manager to do something else. Well, you're probably going to listen to your manager because your manager is your boss's boss, and you're going to do what he does over what your supervisor does. And if your supervisor doesn't know that, then it can cause some issues later on down the line because then you didn't do something that he thought you were going to do because you were doing something else for someone more powerful. And you can see how this can kind of become a problem. So here's a basic chart of what a hierarchy would look like. I decided to use the Catholic Church breakdown as well. As you can see at the very top of the pyramid is the Pope, followed by the cardinals, the archbishops, the bishops, the priests, the deacons, and then the laity, which is essentially just the Catholic population around the world. So if you are Catholic, you would be in that bottom part. And you can see that this pyramid is very interesting because at the very top is the Pope, which is one person who has complete dominant control over all other members of the church and what the Pope says go, essentially, because he is the person that is interpreting the faith from God himself. Occupation, working inside a hierarchical framework. For example, imagine you were a filing clerk for a government healthcare office. Your job's responsibilities would include things like fetching patient files and documentation for any superiors who might need access to them. Complete knowledge of the location and access to these documents is incredibly important, as well as a deep understanding of the hierarchical framework to understand who you need to report to and who basically is more important and who is less important if you're told to do something by them. Pros to this include very simple job duties, tend to be very easy to follow and hard to misunderstand. And the workflow tends to be very simple and easy to follow logic, basically meaning you do this, then you do this, and you do this, then you do this, and you go home, which, even if you're engaged in problematic situations, you can always just fall back on that algorithmic logic to get your job done. Cons, there are cons to this style of work as well, which include a lack of oversight for the overall picture of why you're doing what you're doing. So imagine if you're just some small cog in a machine or for a clock or something, you don't know why you're doing what you're doing and what your role is in the entire thing. You just know you need to sit here and spin this certain way so everything else works. and like it also tends to just make it so the only thing you really care about is to please your direct report, which again kind of can stifle innovation from underlings' perspective, which can cause loss of possible optimization from people who are actually doing the work, if that makes sense. Now we're going to talk about a 5-year strategic plan. A 5-year strategic plan are basically enacted by the higher-ups in the organization to plan and plot out tangible goals a company can aim for at specific breakpoints to help them achieve an overarching goal. You can tend to see these goals used in campaigns a lot for like people who are running for government or mayor and that sort of thing, and they'll to where looking to swing votes to obtain like adoration for their constituents or like citizens of the areas in which they try to be a part of. Here's an image that I found while in an office. This talks about the city of West Ellis trying to become like a better city, becoming the major travel hub. So its first goal is image, brand, and destination, and it says the city of West Ellis will become the preferred municipality in the Milwaukee metropolitan area, the state, and the country for visitors, residents, and business through focused rebranding, market, and promotional actions. So they're going to focus on these actions to become a more desirable area. And you can see once they've completed that first goal, you can move on to the second goal, which would improve the quality of life for people who are living there and bring in more money. Then once you've achieved that second goal, you can go to the third goal, which provides engagement for everyone else. And you can kind of see just all the way down from 1 to 5, achieving the previous goal will complete a crucial step to achieving the next goal, which goes to the next goal, goes to the next goal, goes to the next goal. This is something that is very often used to ensure large, like very easy to follow things that really anyone just by looking at it can follow with very little instruction, and it becomes very goal oriented. Another thing you will need to do if you are the monarch in this hierarchical organization is you need to make sure you have a good recruiting plan that is based off the organizational values. So hierarchical systems of management have been the foundation of all government and successful civilizations and companies since pretty much we've been recording history. They not only allow for large communities of people to work towards single goals, but also allow for lower individuals who might not be equipped to handle situations to work directly under someone and learn from the experience of them. So we've also figured out that in history that if we're all working together, everyone's quality of life tends to improve, which is why this system has been the predominant one being used in almost all civilizations to where humans have been living together. And again, this allows for direct learning experience as well as less responsibility for the uninitiated to bear. So this is nice. So if you're a new hire and you don't know anything, you have very little responsibility, and you pretty much just get told what to do by someone who might know more than you, to ensure to let you have that learning process, and then you would ideally have a plan in which you can follow to where you can learn more and then go on to the same point, and then you would train people and you would climb the ladder that way. Here is a turnover rate that I made that basically talks about the difference between hierarchical organization forms versus in like a company versus other forms of managerial practices, and you can see here the red indicates the hierarchical form, and blue indicates less traditional forms of managerial organization. And you can see that the blue is much higher, meaning that there are much higher employee turnover rates than the red is. So you can see that traditionally speaking, that a hierarchical organization provides much lower employee turnover rates, meaning you're keeping your employees for much longer. Another thing you might want to do if you're doing that is for like budget. So here is just a mock budget I whipped up that kind of just basically shows very simply, it shows you have your price per unit, how many units are being sold, and here's your revenue for the thing. And so you can take like the price in which you're doing it, the price in which you're doing all this stuff, and how much money you're costing, go ahead and do this versus how much you're selling, and you can see whether you're in a deficit or a budget surplus. Basically, are you making money or are you losing money? Here is the more difficult part that you will have to deal with if you are a monarch thing is balancing budgets and cutting expenses from a budget. So as looking back at the previous slide for the budget, as seen each month we went on in the quarter, we saw less and less revenue being generated. Stripping things from a budget will become difficult but not necessary part of operating from a management point of view. So let's say we need to cut expenses equal to 10% of a budget deficit. How would we do that, and what would we cut? Well, looking at it from this ideal is that you would ideally want to cut something from a budget that has the least amount of effect on the product one would be selling or the ability to sell that said product. For this example, the business expenses would have been a monthly service plan and planners. We also see that these are the only two fields that have been decaying demand as time goes on throughout the months. A few ways can be used to accomplish this cut. First being, if you could find a way to lower the cost of these services, you want to provide this would be good because you want to provide the same amount of services, or finally stop operating services that seem to be underused and save money from not having to provide them. So if you're spending money on a specific service that no one's using, it might be beneficial just to remove the cost of providing that service and just dropping the service entirely, and you can get money that way to put in something that is making you money. Now we need to talk about committees that are found within these organizational processes. So I decided to use the example of the U.S. government, one of the largest, if not the largest, hierarchical organization in the United States. And we can see from committees that are found within this organization can include things such as the Budget Committee, the Ethics Committee, and like a Quality Assurance Committee. And each of these committees provide specific goals and insights to help the company succeed in the large picture. So how do we deal with these committees? Communication is key when dealing with any personnel within the workplace. However, it's especially important when dealing with committees because you often tend to only deal with them when there is a problem that you need to resolve. So while as a manager, you retain that absolute power within the hierarchical organization because you are the monarch, there are plenty of benefits to listening to the people who run these committees because you are not living in these committees. That's why you have people running these for you. So the first thing you should be doing is be welcoming and calm when dealing with these people, because while you have the power to directly overrule them, it does not mean that they work directly under you. And so in that respect, you might actually lose some influence over them if you just kind of ignore them and just ignore what they have to say. So you need to understand that committees do exist for a reason, and keeping that in mind, as well as a goal for what the overarching goal for each committee you are dealing with, you might have to deal with, is also can help you greatly increase your productivity, morale, and revenue for the entire company. Because if the committees are doing well, you have to deal with them less because they're coming to you with less problems, for in the sense of like a budget committee, and you will have more money, and that more money will go to everyone, and everyone will be more happy. Which takes us to a process of more of an employee perspective, from an underlings perspective, for an opportunity for learning and expansion. So like the key to keeping employees around for long periods of time is to allow them to feel like they can expand their knowledge and understanding within the workplace they constantly surround themselves in. For example, you can get people to get hired to fulfill mundane jobs which have no real sense of progression, like, packing boxes or something. But if you have a clear path for those who want to progress in that company, to follow employees who wish to do so, will go about that route to become more invested in their work, which will make them more efficient and happier to be there and less miserable, and they will work more efficiently and become more valuable assets in the company in the process of doing this. This education helps the employee become more valuable to the company, and thus usually resulting in more responsibilities and a higher pay grade, which everyone does enjoy. So here's just a mock flowchart that I made that follows an education plan. So you'd have a new hire that would go and attend a workplace orientation to discover what your job responsibilities entail. You'd begin training with a supervisor to gain a basic understanding of job responsibilities. You'd begin then working your job responsibilities through a probationary period to see if you can handle it. Then once you get out of that probation period, you can begin mapping out a career path with a company that offers that something you might be interested in and want to branch out doing. Then you can open up communication with any superior in the interest in the area you want to work in. Once you've done that, you can begin learning a new interesting opportunities and expand your knowledge of the workplace and its operations. To then, once you understand that knowledge and obtain it, you can then go work in that area where you wanted to go to, or choose to stay where you are, or even go seek more information about other workplace duties. And then finally, you can use knowledge and experience you obtain to expand yourself and climb a career ladder and become a more valued employee. So you can kind of see that step process working in a way to make the employee more valuable, more interested in their, more engaged in their job, and becoming a more valuable asset for the company. So this leads back into the managerial sense, to personal leadership responsibility and style, and how it can be important, and how it can be detrimental, or how it can be very constructive. So in my personal leadership experience when acting as the monarch of a hierarchical organization would be in the style of trying to find common ground between myself and subordinates. I've always held the philosophy of you should treat people under you with more respect as you treat people below you, because the people under you know you have power, so showing them respect goes a long way than showing someone above you respect, if that makes sense, because it's kind of expected. So while I retain complete control over a decision, I tend to try to listen to any subordinate claims and attempt to understand their logic and reasoning. This, I feel, is an invaluable tool when dealing with multiple people from possible different backgrounds, whether it be like some new hire who's just out of high school that is very new and doesn't understand the grand picture of what's going on, to some chairman of a committee on the budget committee telling me that we need to cut 30 employees. I feel the adoption of the style of leadership role makes a bond based on respect, as opposed to just a power differential between the managerial staff and subordinates, without losing the sect of control you have over those subordinates, which is always a good thing, to have respect for people but still have the power over them to do what you feel is the best thing to do. This next topic we're going to talk about is called the concept of dead center. And dead center is something that once a group of workers have gotten, it can be hard to get them off. So think of a series of habitual tasks that you just do over and over and over again that eventually become habit, and you don't think about it while you're doing them. You just kind of do them. You kind of just keep doing it over and over, and it becomes very hard to break that habit once you've done it for such a long period of time. So an example is, let's say a problem arises from them operating on dead center. You would have to work to get them off of that habit that they've built in the workplace routines to address the problem. So if, let's say, I managed a document room that handled important health information documents of patients that are moving in and out of the hospital it is based in, and I discovered that some documentation was being misplaced and filed incorrectly, and wrong papers were going, and wrong documentation were going to wrong patients. How would I address this? So I would have to first immediately address the issue, just like address this issue. If the problem persists after I address it and talk to them, it could lead to a cease of function entirely for all the operations in the hospital if we cannot correct the information in a timely manner, because everything will slow down, which is a terrible thing to happen. So if this situation would ever to arise, I would have to cease function and just call everyone to do a group meeting with any and all personnel who take part within the filing process where we know the problem is happening, and I would explain carefully the situation and ask and try to answer any questions that might come out, to try to understand if the people working itself are aware that this is an issue that's been occurring, and if they are aware of the issue, then we can address the problem there and get right back to normal operating procedure with an amended version to try to address that problem. And also, and I feel being real and honest with your subordinates, a problem can often help solve itself if you become less, if you make it not as like you are mad at them for doing it, as if just you are trying to correct a problem and you're not upset for them doing something wrong, because most likely in that case, they could be doing something that they might have known wasn't the best way to do it, but they haven't been told not to do it, so they thought it would be okay. I feel the other option to really do would be to just try to act like a detective and sleuth around to try to catch someone in the act of making the mistake and then correcting it on a case-by-case basis. I feel this is very inefficient because, one, you completely ignore the ability of it could be multiple people or multiple reasons that's causing this problem. So just because you fixed one of the problems doesn't mean you fixed all of them. So having a group meeting and understand, having everyone on the same page that this is a problem that needs to be fixed can help a lot more in solving this issue. And with that being the conclusion of getting off dead center, this is the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and thank you for your time.